Yeah, everyone, welcome Dr. Hassam.
Thank you.
And, I wanted to welcome everyone to tonight's session. I just give me just a couple of minutes to just make sure the security settings are all set.
Till that we can talk with Dr. Hassam?
Not just now. No, we're starting our meeting just now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute everybody so that we can all have a quiet session. And if you could all also please turn off your videos, that would be really helpful.
Okay, the security settings are done, Gulshan.
Thanks. And okay, great. Thanks, Nusri. Okay, so everyone, welcome to tonight's session. We are so delighted to have Dr. Hassam talk to us today, and his topic today is From Duality to Unity. And before we begin, I have a number of housekeeping items, so please bear with me. They're quite a lot, but all of them are important and will help make our session much more enjoyable and serene. So first of all, I would like to request everyone to stay muted with their videos turned off so that we don't have any noise interference during the talk. If you stay that way, remain muted and don't display your video throughout the session, please. Thank you so much. Secondly, for everyone to get a good view of Dr. Hassam during the talk, if you click on the speaker view on the top right-hand corner of your screen, then you will have Dr. Hassam on the main screen. And so you'll be able to see him throughout the talk. Thirdly, we're getting a lot of questions about notifications about future sessions. If you want your notifications by email, could you please email Lakshmi Hamarsi at googlemail.com. I know you don't have to write it down just now. I'm going to put it in the chat section, so you will be able to get it off the chat section as soon as we finish, as soon as Dr. Hassam has started. I'm going to put it in. If you would like to get notified with a WhatsApp for future recordings and sessions, then please enter your WhatsApp number in the chat section. I've been specifically asked, please do not put your email addresses in the chat section. If you want it by email, please email Lakshmi. So I will put the Lakshmi's email in the chat section. I also have a humble request of everyone. Please use your Zoom link only on one device per household so that we can have lots of other participants that can share in the presentation. We have a maximum capacity of 500 people, and in yesterday's session, we already reached that. So if you have an iPhone or a computer, please only use one of these to access the session so that other people can join as well and benefit from Dr. Hassam's knowledge and wisdom. I really appreciate your cooperation and understanding. Finally, I wanted to let you know that if we have time, we will be asking Dr. Hassam if he can please answer a few questions for us at the end of the session. So if you have any questions, please submit it in the chat line, and we will try and address a few of them at least. You are as well, next Tuesday's session is going to be a question and answer session. So whatever questions you put in the chat section, if we can answer them today, we will. Otherwise, they're all being collected and they will be addressed during the other Q&A sessions that Dr. Hassam will be having starting next Tuesday. And thank you for listening. We're now ready to begin the session. So once again, welcome everyone. I would like to thank Dr. Hassam for his untiring efforts and his time commitments to holding these lectures with such diligence week after week. We will start the session with a Ghinan recitation by Karim Boja. Karim, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So while Karim is reciting the Ghinan, I will be showing a picture of Mola Bapa on the screen, which I will be sharing with you all. Karim, are you ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, Bismillah.
सतगुरु कहे रे सतगुरु कहे रे नूरे मिंदर समरिया तेनूरे रचियो आसमान तेनूर माहे थी नूर प्रगतियां सतगुरु नाम रे भाई सतगुरु नाम सतगुरु कहे रे सतगुरु कहे रे दिल माहे देवल पूजिए अन्य दिल माहे देव द्वारे दिल माहे साया आपे से दिल माहे आपे दीदार रे अने दिल माहे आपे दीदार सतगुरु कहे रे सतगुरु कहे रे दमो दम अली जपिए अने अबराते चीतन लाय पियो पटुंतरो रतीन राखिए जियो समंदर लगे रे समाय रे भाई जियो समंदर लगे रे समाय
Are you done? Thank you, Karin. Thank you, Karin. Dr. Hassam,
Yes.
I would like you to please start your lecture. Bismillah.
Yali Madat, everyone. Welcome for tonight's session, which is entitled From Duality to Unity. Let us first begin by offering our humble shukrana and prostration to our beloved Imam, in the name of our beloved Imam, who is the Lord of the age and time, who is the all-merciful, the all-compassionate, who is the Lord of the great throne, who is the Lord of creation, the Lord of the day of judgment. Khudawand, Nur Maulana Shah Karim al-Husseini, please say salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala. It is amazing when we reflect upon the Ginans and the Ginanic traditions. And I think by now members of the Jamaat know very well and know full well that in my session I always like to begin with Ginans or Qasidas. We had a beautiful Qasida yesterday in the honor and praise of Maulana Murtaza Ali alayhi salam. And today's Ginan, which is the Saloko by Holy Pir Shams. And if you have followed the three verses that were recited by Karim, the first verse spoke about creation. Amazing. This is questions that people have had from time immemorial. For example, even today from a scientific perspective, people ask and say, where did creation come from? Where did we come from? How did we as human beings or as a life form ended up into this creation? And in this first verse of the Holy Ginan, that's the gist, says, the whole creation, the earth and heavens, all came from the Nur of Hazrat Imam, please say Salawat. The Nur was responsible to bring this creation into existence. Even more reason for us to understand and to know how we can continuously and continually appreciate the mysteries of what our tariqah reveals to us in this spiritual wisdom and spiritual knowledge. And then the other Ginans, the other part of the Ginan spoke about Mawla Murtaza Ali, how one receives ultimate liberation and salvation by the name of Mawla Ali alone. And then the other verse of the Ginan spoke about where does God exist? Where is He? Where does He live? Where does the Lord manifest Himself? And it says it is in the heart of the believers. He lives in the heart of the believer. That is where His dwelling is. It says that it is there that all the experiences happen. And our Holy Pir reveals the secret connection to say it is in the heart that you will eventually get this didar. You can see every verse of Ginan, and this Saloko is amazing. When I say amazing, I have to add and say this. Did you know that Maulana Hazrat Imam has said during the Silver Jubilee, he has said and made this statement that Islam is eternal. Think about this statement. Islam is eternal. And then our beloved Imam went on to explain that Islam was there before, Islam is here today, and Islam is here to stay till eternity. Because it is eternal. Our beloved Imam during the Silver Jubilee, in making that statement, he revealed before us some things that historians of religion perhaps cannot make the connection. Because historians of religion would probably say, well, Islam came into being 1500 years ago. And before that was Christianity, and before that was Judaism, and before that was the other branches of the Abrahamic faith. And then maybe they can take us back to the time of the biblical Adam, maybe 8,000-9,000 years back. And then what was before that, in whichever way historians of religion explain how these various faiths came into being. Our beloved Imam say Islam is eternal. Now, I just like to point out, it's not my subject today, but I'd like to give you something to think about. And if Islam is eternal, that means it was there from the beginning of creation. Because something that is eternal existed into the spiritual realm, but came into the material realm. And what came into the material realm as a religion or as a faith to be practiced was Islam. And in understanding that, we need to be able to put into perspective and say, wow, if Islam was the beginning of creation, then what are the other forms that Islam took over time and over this evolution? And to the point when it came to the time of Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it became manifest during the time of the Prophet as Islam. And you know, there is a verse in the Holy Quran that says, when the imamat of Maulana Murtaza Ali sallallahu alayhi wasallam was made public and evident, a verse came to say, now your religion is complete and given the name Islam. Something for you to think about. So think about this. Islam is eternal. The soul is eternal. The Nur is eternal. What are the connecting points? What are the points that connect this amazing description and explanation by our beloved Imam? Now that Farman had also an explanation about the notion of how science is not in conflict in Islam and particularly in our faith. And our beloved Imam says there are other faiths, they may have a conflict to solve between science and their practices, but we don't face that practice. We don't face that conflict. That conflict does not exist in Islam, and that conflict certainly does not exist in our tariqah. Maybe sometime in the future, I like your feedback. I always like your observation, because today's lecture is based on your request, on your feedback, and the reason why you are asking an explanation about this notion of duality and unity, but specifically on the basis of a certain framework, which I am happy to present and happy to explain. I'd like to say also at this juncture that I have deliberately kept this lecture tonight like an overview, like a brief presentation. So we have a beginning and a kind of a completion. But if the subject interests you in some greater detail, I am quite prepared to later on give an exposition rather of the more salient detail about the processes involved in what I am presenting to you tonight. So I would like to begin by reminding everyone, in every sense possible, the fundamental concept about our spirituality. And I mean spirituality within the context of the Shia Imami Ismaili Islam, spirituality in the context of our hakikat. And like I say in all my presentations, I am not in any way trying to go outside the context of what we are exploring in the articulation of our tariqah in Islam and from the Islamic point of view from other faiths. That is not my specific concern in this particular lecture. Having said that, let us remind ourselves of Hazrat Imam's position and guidance related to the search in our spirituality. In our constitution, Maulana Hazrat Imam has said, historically and in accordance with Ismaili tradition, the Imam of the time is concerned with spiritual advancement as well as improvement of the quality of life of his murids. The Imam's talim lights the murid's path to spiritual enlightenment. This is a very important sentence. The Imam's talim lights the murid's path to spiritual enlightenment and vision. In temporal matters, the Imam guides the murid and motivates them to develop their potential. I wanted to make sure that we read that paragraph because it is so important in the context of what we are doing. So, what is this notion of duality to unity? Well, one of the most significant aspects of human experience is the fact that when the soul enters the physical realm and eventually takes birth in the human form, this soul, which I'd like to say it's the luminous substance, this soul that we say that is the Ruh or the Atma, that is our real self. But having said that, the question that was then asked, that if that is my real self, as it is said, and we have heard it hundreds of times, that the real me, the real you is the soul. It's the Atma. It's the spirit. It's the Ruh. Why is it that I cannot experience or know my soul? Consequently, this saying of Hazrat Maulana Murtaza Ali alayhi salam that says, he who knows himself knows God. You have heard of this saying. He who knows himself knows God. Even when you look at the traditional wisdom during the time of the Greeks, in the great temple of Delphi, there is an inscription on the temple arch that says, know thyself. Even the great philosopher prophet of the Greek times, Socrates, who was the teacher of Plato, and Plato himself was the teacher of Aristotle. But Socrates said, unexamined life is not worth living. Look at all these sayings. Mullah Murtaza Ali saying, the writings on the Temple of Delphi, Socrates as a prophet and also as one of the greatest philosophers that ever lived. Unexamined life is not worth living. And I've mentioned before another saying that says, the least initial deviation from the truth is multiplied later 1,000-fold or 100-fold. So when you go away from the truth, when you go away from the path of truth, then where you end up, it's a matter of guesswork. But you are certainly away from that truth. So let's go back to the saying of Socrates and Mullah Murtazali that he who knows himself knows God, and unexamined life is not worth living. So what examination do we need to conduct about oneself? Well, ask yourself from a very practical point of view. Again, I would like to point out, I am deliberately choosing a narrative, a dialogue mode of presentation to make the subject less heavy and easily, hopefully, with Mullah's blessing, easily accessible and understandable. Because today's subject constitutes a number of stages that needs to be made connection with, and also my point to ensure that people understand it without too much effort on their part. So, as human beings, we pride ourselves on our experience as human beings, and we begin this experience or the identification of this experience by our waking state. So we are familiar with the waking state of our experience. And when I say the waking state, it means that we are conscious. There is an awareness. When I say conscious, we are aware of our waking state. You can tell that you are awake. You can tell that you are aware. Other people can see that you are aware. You can see that other people are aware. This state that we call waking, in contrast to other states of our consciousness and experience. So, what happens when the conscious state of wakefulness, when you are awake, when that state comes to its culmination during a period of 24 hours or so, and you say, where do I go from my waking state? Well, the next state that we have after the waking is actually called the dream state or the dreaming state. And this dreaming state is many people throughout the ages, for thousands of years, have always wanted to know and explore, what do we do in your dreams? You can more or less say what you do in the waking state. Now, what is it that you do in your dreams? And what are dreams? The third state, so now I hope you're following my argument, that you're awake when you go to sleep, meaning when you go to bed, straight from the waking state, you begin to slip and migrate into another state we call the dream state. And then your dream begins. But where do you go from the dream state? From the dream state, you go to another level of consciousness, and we call that the sleep or the deep sleep state. Or sometimes people call it the state of sleep without dreams. In other words, a dreamless sleep. Is there any other state? Yes, there is. The difficulty is that we are all familiar with the three states of daily experience: waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep or deep sleep. A normal human being experiences these three states every day. Every day. We are awake, we go into our dream state, dream sleep, and then dreamless sleep or deep sleep. But no one comes back with any vital changes in their way of life. It's a daily, constant recurrence with most people. For example, if you are a person with a certain profession, whether you're a scientist, a philosopher, a medic, whether you are a teacher, whether you are a laborer, whatever it may be, the profession you have been entrusted with. When you go to sleep and you go through these states, the waking, the dreaming, and the deep sleep or the dreamless sleep, when you wake up, you come back the same. You haven't changed. In other words, you still always remain on this same plane of duality. So that is the duality part. And every time you go to sleep, in whichever shape or form, when you wake up, you don't wake up any different. You are still in that same plane of duality, despite all the greatness you think you may achieve into this form. So let's say, even if you happen to win the Nobel Prize, one of the most cherished and respected prizes, if you happen to win name and fame, if you happen to be even extremely wealthy, what will change? Nothing. You will still go to sleep. You will still go into dreams. You will still go into the state of dreamless sleep and spend your 6, 7, 8 hours there, and then come back again from the dreamless sleep to the dream state and back to your waking state. What has changed? Nothing, except your existence in this plane of duality. So, if I can put it this way, the panorama of growth and decay continues to be the same until you can attain another state of understanding and experience. And that is the state that we call the state of unity. So the perspective is to go from this state of duality to the state of unity. Now let us explore. Let us go a little deeper and see what is significant in the waking state, what is significant in the dream state, and what is significant in the dreamless state. And then see, are we in any position to think of anything higher than that? And if so, how? So, this experience induces a complete change in human life. When I'm speaking about which experience I'm speaking about, the experience that if you're able to go beyond the dreamless sleep, it will bring a totally new experience to you. And this experience of the unity, if you like, it is indeed the identification of the personal self to the Supreme Being. We are going from duality to unity, meaning that the quest is, how do I eventually come to know the Supreme Being? Now, I'm using this as a general term, but you know what I'm leading to. I'm speaking about the individual soul going through these 3 levels of experiences: the waking, the dreaming, the dreamless, and then going to this ultimate state. I'll call it ultimate now, or call it a superconscious state. When you go into that superconscious state, there is a different form of realization. He who knows himself knows God. So in that ultimate state, you come to know yourself. But in knowing yourself, something amazing happens too. So when you get to that ultimate state, let me say it from now, when you get to that fourth state, if you like, that human being becomes free from hate, from all his doubts are dispelled, all the doubts are gone, all his fears are removed, all his weaknesses are obliterated, and that human being becomes free in every sense of the word. In other words, he gains this freedom that our beloved Imam Sultan Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has often mentioned to us in the context of our tariqah. You remember what the Imam says? Freedom. It's our tariqah is that of a freedom. And he said that we have to learn to remove the false conception in religion. And only the Imam can help us do that because he guides us to the path of truth. This is what the Imam said. So we need to figure out that why these three levels of experiences have some sort of significance for us. So when we think about the normal human being, while waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep are common to all human beings, the fourth state, the state of unity, so to speak, is very, very rare indeed. It is not something that is common to most people. In fact, it is very rare. And later on, I may have something to say about it. Now, what happens in a waking state? Most people will think and say, well, I know what happens in a waking state when I'm awake, because I am conscious of what is happening. But you have to put that against the dream and the dreamless state to know even more. So in the waking state, a person realizes himself as a distinct individual, which we know. His self-consciousness is quite marked. He knows where he is about, what is he doing, and what is he experiencing. He's able to say, he or she is able to say, I'm a man, I am a woman, I am dark, I am fair, I am tall, I am short, I belong to such and such a family, I belong to such and such a community, and so on. He is immediately aware of his present situation. And that is not a mystery. Everyone admits to that. But here begins the quest. Did you see all this statement? I am, I am, I am, I. Who is this I? Who is this I? Is it the real you? I am this, I am that, I am tall, I am rich, I am... Who is this I? This I-ness, remember this part is very important in what we are doing this evening. This I, or we call it I-ness, is the ego. That is what we call the ego. So anytime you start a statement and you say, I, and we know that that's the normal thing that we do as part of being human and as part of being awake. I means I am the ego. This is my ego speaking. Now don't take this negatively, because you know the word ego is often used so negatively that we sometimes think, oh, that's a really bad thing. It's not. This is a part of our well-being. It's a part of our being. That's how we relate. And I'll come to explain a little down the road how this notion of the ego actually emerges. So this I-ness is the ego. A human being is particularly and specifically bound by his ego consciousness. What do I mean by ego consciousness? Ego consciousness is the awareness of your ego And when you say I, it means I am aware that I'm saying I. This is my ego consciousness in the waking state. Okay? So when you say I, and I am the ego, and I'm aware I'm saying I, you are in your waking state. That is your ego consciousness. I hope you will forgive me if I am sometimes over-explaining. It's because I want to make sure that you are not falling for another different understanding, because sometimes these notions are explained in many different other ways, and I want to make sure that you are following the explanation I am putting before you for the purpose of my lecture this evening. So, this ego consciousness in the waking state. But the thing is this: the ego is not the real you. The ego is not the real man. For it is the real man identified with the body-mind complex. Let me explain that. At the level of our body and mind, we identify ourselves with this I, this ego. When you look at yourself in a mirror, what do you see? Oh, that is me. That is the I. That is how I look. So in other words, your mind tells you that this is your body, and your body tells you how your mind is thinking, so to speak. There is this body-mind complex relationship, and you identify yourself, oh, that is me, that is I. So this I-ness is an expression of your body-mind complex. But you know very well this body and mind, or this body-mind complex, is not the real you. There must be something more to it. There must be something more to it. This is simply an identification. By the same token, through the ego, a person identifies himself with everything he contacts. Right? So, when you come into contact with another individual, what comes in contact with that individual? Your ego. The one that says, I am so-and-so, you are so-and-so. Whatever you come into contact with in your waking life, during the time you are awake, it is your ego that is making that contact. You are relating your body-mind complex through your I-ness into that contact. So, ask yourself at this stage, because remember that is the part of unity. This is duality, not to unity in a sense. And I'll keep going back and forth until we explore all the dimensions. What then is the real person? What then is the real me? So if the ego is simply the object, the soul objectifying himself at the level of the body-mind complex, who am I in reality? Well, the real human being, the real man, so to speak, having body consciousness, is the knower of the body. Ask yourself, who is it that is saying I? When I say I am tall, I am short, I am so and so, who's that saying? Who is speaking there? What is it in you that is enabling you to say that? That is the real part of our being. And I would say to you, for the moment, call it your luminous self. Call it your conscious self. In our terminology, we say it is the soul that is speaking. But the question was, how come I cannot experience my soul if it is a soul that is speaking? Because I can hear myself. I can see my mouth move when I speak. I can see my eyes and everything else. But what about experiencing that inner self? So, the thing is this. The one that says, I know, I am aware, I am listening. It's that inner self that we identify as the soul. But now wait, I haven't quite come into the definitions and description. I'm simply giving you the points of contact. So, in saying this, what do we say? We say that the real person, the spiritual light that is within us, the soul, is the very essence. Now let me give you a point of understanding and contact. Excuse me. The question that was asked that prompted this lecture was to say, how come I can't experience my soul, my Atma? How do I know I have a soul? Because I can say I have a body. I can think through my mind. I can even say I am this, I am that. But beyond that, I don't know. So before we go to the other stages, let me at least make a jump start to the other side. And the jump start is this, that when you say I am conscious, the very primacy of consciousness is the evidence of the existence of the soul. There will be no consciousness if the spirit or the Atma or the soul would not be there. Even though you can't experience the soul with your five senses, but the soul expresses itself in the form of this awareness you call consciousness. And this consciousness is the very essence of our being. So let me put it to you this way before we continue any further. And I'll give you many examples. When you see a person that is alive, you know he is alive. Why? Because he is conscious. For one thing, he's conscious. One of the great evidence of being alive is to be conscious, to be aware, and then even to be awake. Of course, in other states we can be alive too, but in this one here, it's very evident. But when we see a person is no longer alive, if you were to put a live person lying down and a person who is not live side by side, what would be the difference? You would not know the difference unless you would be able to come to an answer to say, is he conscious or is he unconscious? And unconsciousness could mean there is nothing in that person. Something is missing in that person that made him dead, or in this case, so to speak, unconscious. But a live person would say, I'm still breathing, I am aware, of being awake, and I am conscious. So consciousness is definitely one of the criteria that enables us to come to this reality. Let me give you an example. If you look at a ray of light, well, the ray of light does not know itself, nor does it know anything else. It's simply a ray of light. But the spiritual light shining within us, the spiritual light that is within us, is self-aware. That ray of light is not aware of anything. But we are self-aware and at the same time aware. Self-aware and at the same time aware. We are self-aware because that spiritual light is, in a sense, self-sustaining. It's luminous. It draws its essence from the Supreme Being. But we are self-aware. And this awareness that we have is an expression of our soul, our Atma. So, To put it very simply and also very directly, is to be able to say, how do I know I am spirit or Atma? Because I am conscious. I have consciousness. And consciousness, the primacy of consciousness, is the evidence for the existence of the soul. Now, let me just emphasize one thing here. I know that in our quote-unquote scientific studies about the mind, many researchers today identify consciousness with the mind. That is an academic pursuit. In other words, is consciousness the mind and mind consciousness? No, not necessarily. Because in the wisdom literature, meaning in the traditional spiritual realm, we identify the mind as something different and we identify consciousness as something different. And we'll come to it in a minute, so you'll see the difference. But when you look at the scientific understanding today, in many instances, many scientists who studies the mind and the brain and their connection and relation, they say, well, the mind is, rather consciousness is just an expression of the mind, or the mind itself is consciousness. No, it is not. It is not. And that's why we need to understand the deeper details so we have a greater understanding about that aspect of our being. And that is really important so we don't make this confusion. So anyway, we are self-aware and we are aware. So this spiritual light shining in us is indeed, that's what creates this awareness. So there is a fundamental difference between the spiritual light and the physical light, to put it simply. Meaning that light we carry always within us. That is the very essence of our being. Okay? That light that we carry within us is the very essence of our being. Do you remember Imam Sultan that said that prayer is a daily necessity? This is in the memoirs. Prayer is a daily necessity. It is the direct communication of the spark with the universal flame. The spark. This is the spark I'm talking about. That is the light we carry within us. It is that spark. That is the very essence of our being. The real me, the real you, the real person is that spark. But then, what about these other states of mind or experience? As I said, waking, dreaming, and dreamless. What are their importance? Let's see. The mind, let me begin by this statement. The mind is not self-luminous because the mind is objectified. Anything that is objectified has no light as its essence. Remember that. I'm going to explain objectification in a second. So, this idea that the mind is not luminous, but it's only alive or functioning because it is objectified, it simply means that the mind receives its power through that spark. A minute ago, I said to you, it is that spark, it is a direct communication of that spark with the universal flame. That spark, which is the real essence within us, which is the luminous essence within us, it is that spark that gives the mind its power of operation, its power of functioning. And so we call that objectification. The mind is being objectified, and as a result of being objectified, the mind assumes that life. And we, perhaps mistakenly, may assume that, oh, the mind is really what is of importance. It is important. We'll see how in a moment. within that specific context. So, as I mentioned, anything that is objectified has no light at its essence. And this has been pointed out by many mystics over the ages. So, the mind has a knower. I hope you're following me. So there is this light. It knows the mind. The mind has a knower. So, having said that, if the mind has a knower, that it is that spark that I call the self, or that luminous aspect of our being, is that knower. It's very important to know this, because you will not be able to relate to these other states that I will explain shortly, unless you know, if you like, the end of where that process is. Well, it's not the end, it's the beginning of the end, so to speak. So the self is a knower. It is the real me, the real you. The self, that spark, whose nature is pure consciousness. So I'm just defining that spark, that soul, that atma, that spirit. It's pure consciousness. It ever shines and is changeless. It never changes. It's always shining, always luminous, but it never changes. The knower of the change undergoes modification, or undergoes the change. The self is the knower, changeless, pure, free, and by nature immortal. That's why we say, our beloved Imam tells us, the soul is immortal. The soul is eternal, beyond growth and decay, belonging to the supreme reality and perfect, the perfection we always carry within ourselves. That's why Mawla Murtaza Ali, Hazrat Ali alayhi salam said, he who knows himself knows God. That is that perfection we are speaking about. That is that spark that is in communication during prayers with the universal flame. That is the perfection we always carry within us. I completely realize that sometimes we speak in abstract terms and you have to kind of engage your thinking and your mind, but I hope it's not made difficult, because hopefully you are awake and you are aware of where we are at. Well, having said that, what happens through the modification of the mind? Well, through the modification of the mind, that spark, that essence is individualized. What makes you an individual separate than me? What makes your partner an individual? What makes your next door neighbor an individual? You know, that's an expression we use, right? We say, well, that individual or that person, you know, or that other being that we know, we look at them very separately as individuals. So we say, through this modification of the mind, that spark is what causes this individuality. Let me explain once more. The Atma, the soul, that spark that is within us, when it gives its power, it lends its power to that aspect of our being called the mind. The mind is objectified, and through the process of being objectified, there is a modification of the mind, and this modification that is prompted by the spark or the essence causes this individuality. So we are individualized. Why am I a separate individual than yourself? Is because the essence, the root, the Atma, the soul is individualized at the level of the mind. And what does that mean? That means that is characterized by what we said earlier on during the waking state when we say I am tall, I am dark, I am this, I am that, the I-ness. That's our individuality. And I hope you recognize that. So that whenever we recognize ourselves, we must pass through this I. How else would you know who you are? Because sometime in a conversation, you say to a person, well, you know what? You is you, me is me. I am I, and you are some other different person. So we cannot comprehend ourselves without this I-ness. You can see this is necessary. Even though we may recognize that our I, when I say I am this, I am that, our I is not the real me. Because right now we have expressed the fact that the real me is that spark. But when I say I am this and I am that, and I recognize the I in my waking state as my ego, that is not the real me. So, it is the real person, means that spark that is behind the I, the ever-shining essence, the Ruh, the Atma. True modification of the mind is manifested as the ego. In this sense, the real person becomes identified with the physical body. This is the process. And if we are in a position to put that into perspective and basically reverse the question to say, how is the ego formed and identified with the physical body? What makes you an individual separate than me? It is because the spark, the Ruh, the spirit, the soul, the Atma, which is that ever-shining spiritual particle of light in us, through modification of the mind, is manifested as the ego. That is what makes our individuality. And so, it is logical to say that it is this real aspect of our being that becomes identified with our physical bodies. So then what happens? What happens is this, that in the waking state of our being, we are conscious of two things, or if you like, two aspects of the waking reality. And that is, the first one, on the one hand, we see external phenomena. So when you're awake and you look at the world outside you, these are the external phenomena. I see the tree, I see a car, I see the sky, I see a star at night, I see other people, I see the world around me, the external phenomena. On the other hand, even when I am awake, there is a procession of internal phenomena. So I can tell something is happening inside me too. There are lots of things happening outside. There are lots of things happening inside me too. But the thing is this. When I am awake, I can only perceive part of the actual reality through my mind, who is focused in the external world and to some degree into this internal phenomena. Now let me say something about the mind itself. Like I said to you in the beginning of my presentation, it's not possible in tonight's lecture to give all the details about the mind, but let me just put something to you. How many parts do you think the mind has? 1 part, 2 parts, 3 parts? Actually, the mind has 16 parts. The mind is divided into 16 parts, and these 16 parts are divided further into many other subparts. I'm speaking to you about from the perspective of spiritual physiology, not material. In any event, the mind is not considered material, but yet it is part of much more finer, subtle matter. Let's not go into those details because I don't want to divert myself to other things right now. Simply to tell you, do not take the mind for granted. My goodness me. The mind is an amazing creation from Allah. It is one of the amazing creation. And if you only knew the different parts of how the mind plays, it's like a universe in its own. And maybe, as I said, if you're interested in that, send your request and we will see what we can do to come to it. But I strongly believe that kind of knowledge can help us understanding many mysteries about the spirit. So the thing is this. For the purpose of my lecture today, let me just say this to you. The mind has basically two parts. I said there are 16, but let's say for today's lecture, we are only going to be simple and take two parts. There is an upper part of the mind, the upper part, and we call that the conscious mind. And then there is the remaining part, call it part 2, or the lower part of the mind. We call that the subconscious mind. Okay? So the mind is one. Don't divide them. It's one. But during the time when we are awake, during the time when we are in the ego consciousness, meaning in the waking cycle of our being, we only have access to the conscious mind, this upper part of the mind. And we don't have access to the subconscious. There's no way, not while you're awake. So this upper part of the mind, it's only a segment of the entire mind. So sometimes we feel happy, sometimes we have fears, sometimes we have hope, sometimes we have unhappiness, and so on. But within us, we still carry many tendencies and desires and memories and impressions. Let me make sure that we are on the same page. Only a part of the mind is revealed to the ego consciousness. When we are awake, when we are aware of our wakefulness in the physical state of being, when we know that we are not asleep or into any other state, only a part of the whole mind is revealed to that ego consciousness, to the I. That part of the mind, as I mentioned to you, we call that the conscious mind. But remember what I just said a minute ago. The notion that why is it that sometimes, even when I'm awake, I feel happy, sometimes I have my fears, sometimes I have my hopes, sometimes, and then I become unhappy again. Where are those impressions coming from besides your waking experience by the conscious mind? So the idea is to recognize that there is another part of our being where all these memories, these tendencies, these desires, they exist into another aspect of our being, and that is into the subconscious. I'll explain in a second. But to make sure that we are making this connection rightly so we don't get lost. So, in the waking state, we are driven. We are in a way locked by our body consciousness. I hope you agree. The fact that I'm awake, you are awake, and the fact that we're using our conscious mind, that conscious mind is strongly locked and linked to our body consciousness. And we can make that relationship. However, in the dream state, the individual self, remember what I said about the self, that spark? in the dream state, that spark, that individual self moves from the physical level down to the subconscious level. So to say it practically, when I go to sleep, my physical body is there in bed, and when I am fading to sleep, I enter that next level called the dream state. Entering the dream state means you are actually entering the subconscious level of your mind. Remember what I said? During waking stage, you have the ego consciousness, and only the upper part of the mind is revealed to the ego consciousness. But when you go to sleep, that ego consciousness itself stays with that level because it is objectified with the body, remember? But the real you, that spark, shifts further down your consciousness, that level we call dream. And in the dream, we are entering the other part of the mind, the lower part, we call the subconscious. So when we talk about dream, you should immediately make that link and say, when I'm in my dream state, when I'm having this sapna, I am in my subconscious mind, because only, as I mentioned, and I keep repeating this, only a part of the mind is revealed to the ego consciousness. So, because in a waking state we identify ourselves with a physical body, physical consciousness, in the dream state we move, and I say we means that spark, the real we, moves into the subconscious part of the mind. So in the dream state, that individual self that moves from the physical level down to the subconscious level has a different state of experience. So below the level of consciousness, in that subconscious region, so remember, conscious, subconscious. So below the conscious, in the subconscious region, resides our tendencies, our yearning, and the past impressions of our experiences in life. It's like a memory bag, if you like. It's like your memory chip in there. Your subconscious is where all your tendencies, all your yearnings, all your past impressions of the experiences of your life lies into that subconscious. It's not in the conscious. If it was, you would be experiencing it, but you're not. So in the waking state, a person has a definite ego consciousness. You know that by now, I hope. But when the individual self, that spark, moves from the physical level into the subconscious level, where all these impressions are stored, the sense of the waking ego is lost. I hope you understand. There's no more ego there. Your ego consciousness is basically gone. It's not there anymore. Not at the subconscious level. That sense of your awareness is actually gone. It's lost. And as I said, the experience that we have at that level is actually the experience of what we call dream. So the self, that spark, the real you, is submerged into a storm of impression, as it was. So think about this. Let me make it a bit more simpler if I can. When you are awake, that Atma, that spark, that soul of ours, experiences the material world through the material mechanism that we call ego consciousness. But when we go to sleep, in other words, when we go to bed to begin with, and we enter the sleep realm, and we are now into the sleep part of our being, which is the dream part. That's the first part of it, internally, the dream part. When the self enters the dream part, the subconscious mind, it is now like you enter an ocean full of these stored impressions, as it were. And then what happens there? What happens when you enter the dream state of your being? But before I go there, let me ask this. Does anyone disagree that from the waking state, you go into the dream state? No, you don't disagree. Because everybody, in some shape or form, speaks about having dreams. And today, I'm not covering the aspect of dream physiology. You know, there is a huge body of scientific study about what dreams are in terms of the physical physiology, rapid eye movement, and the various things that happens during the 4 stages of sleep and everything else. No, we are not going there because we will never end this area. But simply to say, yes, there is that part. I'm not exploring the physiological aspect. I am exploring the subtle aspect. So what happens when the self enters the subconscious mind? It is the self that is being submerged in all these stores of our impression, yearning, and experiences of life. In that store, if you like. Well, the first thing you will come to notice, and this is really a very important part of my talk this evening, that the reasoning power, the power to reason, the power of rationality, the power of reasoning, and the power of volition do not function in the subconscious state. So when you're in the subconscious mind, which is when you enter your dream state of your experience, your reasoning power and your will, remember this, reason and will, which is your volition, stop functioning. You will find you cannot achieve these results of reasoning and control. Remember, the will is an ability of our control. Those two functions of reasoning power and volition do not function in the subconscious state. Imagination and emotion basically take over in an almost uncontrolled way. You may be surprised, but maybe not surprised because you probably realize that now in a conscious state, that during your dream state, your imagination and emotion take over in an uncontrolled state. Why do I say uncontrolled? Because I just told you, you don't have control over it. Will and reason don't function there. Therefore, you cannot control them. In other words, your ego consciousness that has the ability to reason and to have will, your volition, works at the level of ego consciousness. But ego consciousness disappears, becomes inactive at the level of the dream level, at the dream state. And in the dream state, you're in a subconscious state. Your imagination and emotion are basically uncontrolled. So what happens? Imagination creates any number of images from the subtle impressions of the subconscious. I repeat this. Imagination creates any number of images from the subtle impressions. And in your dream state, that's how you see all those images that come to you. And then, in the dream state, we are deprived of the two great powers which characterizes us as human beings. So remember what I said? you do not have reasoning power and you do not have the capacity of the will. They don't function there. But there are two great powers which characterizes us as human beings, the reasoning power, which is what I mentioned earlier on, and the will power. These two great powers. We are indeed at the mercy of imagination and emotion. I just repeated myself, but in a different way, but simply to say this. Two great powers which characterizes us as human beings. Remember, we can reason. We have willpower. This is different than other species, remember? Because this capacity of reasoning and willpower is very much so above other species that we know that lives amongst us. But we are indeed at the level of the subconscious. When we are into our dream state, the second level of experience, we are at the mercy of emotion and imagination. Then, what happens? From the dream state, we'll come back to the dream state a little later. Then in the dream state, we enter a third state that we call deep sleep. In other words, we go even further down. So, let me just quickly summarize. There is the waking state. When you go to bed, sorry, let me rephrase. There is the waking state within which your ego consciousness has access to the conscious mind. And then there is the phase whereby when you retire to bed and when you are seeking to go to sleep, you enter the phase that is known as your dreams or your dream state. And in that dream state, you are actually accessing the other part of the mind, which is your subconscious mind. And when you access that part of your being, your subconscious mind, you lose totally the control of reason and willpower, and only imagination and emotion takes over. And in that context, you basically are ruled by the experiences of your dream without any sense of volition or reason. Now, let me give you an example. I think you understand, but for people who might need an example. Let's say that you are watching TV and you have the remote control in your hand. And you watch TV, you have the remote in your hand, you flip channels, you are awake, you know you're awake because you are flipping channels, your eyes are open, and let us say, because of the natural cycle of the human being, the time comes when now your ego consciousness, your waking self, wants to go to sleep, so to speak, and you close your eyes, you are sitting on your sofa or your chair, your eyes closes, and you are now shifting from your ego consciousness into your dream sleep, into your dream state. Now, at the moment when you do that and you are slipping away, all of a sudden, what happens? The remote comes out of your hand and falls on the floor, and the noise wakes you up. Have you experienced of that? Of course, thousands of people experience that, sometime every day. What happened? You were awake. You were in control. You were even changing channels. You were even adding and lowering the volume. Suddenly, that remote that was in your hand, you lost control. You had no more will to hold it. And you had no more reason to hold it either. You lost control. Why? The ego consciousness that functions at the conscious level faded away. You entered another state of mind where you had no control. It's a simple example, but I think it makes the point. So, what then happens? In deep sleep, we go even further down, far below the dream level of the mind, where there is another level. So that we are on the same page, we are the waking level, we are awake, you enter the dream state, and now what I'm saying to you, there is another level below the dream state. So you don't always stay in the dream state throughout the night. You are out of the physical level, you are now into the dream state, but you don't stay there all the time. And we know that physiologically and otherwise. You enter another level that we can call, if you like, the causal state. Waking state, dream state, you now enter a state called the causal state. So in the dream state, there are diversities of these experiences. What experiences? In the mind, just to be sure that I'm not losing you, that in the dream state, we have these diversities in the mind. As I mentioned, love, feeling, and memory. But in the causal state, all becomes homogeneous. Below the dream state, there is the causal state, and when that spark enters the causal state, guess what happens? Everything is homogeneous. It becomes the same. It is as if nothing is existing and nothing existed. So, for example, I'll give you an example. Take a seed, which is the causal state of the tree, right? If you ask yourself, how did the tree come into being? You say, well, the tree came into being because of the seed. The seed was the cause of the tree. So we call that the causal state. In the tree, we notice variation. But in the seed, which contains the tree in a latent form, no variation is noticeable. Are you following me? If you take the seed, inside the seed, which you cannot see, it's that whole tree. But when you plant the seed and the tree comes up, you see the variation. So the seed was the cause of that tree. In the same way, exactly the same way, there is a causal state of the mind. There is some kind of a seed, if you can call it, a cause that prompts the mind in each individual, where all operations of the mind are completely hidden. Just like the seed hides the tree, there is a seed, there is a causal state rather, we call that the seed, the causal state, that hushes, that hides all the operations of the mind. Even the ego consciousness, the one that is when we are awake, becomes lost. It's very important to know this. We do not know where we are. We do not know actually what we are when we enter below the level of that dream. Essentially, to give you an example, let's say if you were a king of a kingdom or a country, when you go to sleep and when you're awake, you're the king, you're sitting on that throne and everything else, and you're ruling your kingdom. But when you go to sleep and you enter your dream state, and then when you go below your dream state, you are no longer, a king is no longer a king. You're no longer the king. You are no longer whom you claim to be at the level of the ego consciousness. In fact, complete ignorance reigns at the level below the dream state, the causal state. But the individual self, meaning the spark, remains. And it remains how? As the witness of that ignorance or the experience of that ignorance. Never lose sight of that spark. Remember, it is that spark that enters various forms of that experience. So in that causal state, when you enter that state, there is total blank. You in fact lose complete identity. You no longer know who you are. So in that deep sleep, we have no will, no self-awareness at all. Remember this, no will, no volition, no self-awareness at all. But when we emerge, when we come back into the waking state, what happens? We have all the necessary opportunities again that the waking state offers to us. And what are those opportunities? Those are the opportunities of progress that we can make during the waking state. So, just to step back for a second, in deep sleep we have no will, no self-awareness. But when we emerge into the waking state, we have all the necessary abilities and opportunities for progress. So remember this, no achievement, no progress is possible except in the waking state. You agree? By the way I've just explained to you, you have to be into the waking state to be able to make any kind of progress or any kind of achievement. No progress takes place at the subconscious level because in that state there is no self-awareness. There is no self-awareness. You can only be self-aware when you are awake. You can only have the power of will and reasoning and volition when you are awake. When you go into the subconscious level or into the causal state, which is the deep state, the deep sleep state, you cannot do anything. There is no way you can make any progress, any change, or any improvement. So nothing takes place on the subconscious level because there is no state of self-awareness. Similarly to this dream, I should say, and the dreamless state are, in a sense, in a state of intoxication, of coma, or self-induced by drugs, if you like, or hypnosis. That's another way of doing it. They are alike the dream and the dreamless state, or the deep sleep, or they lack the power of reasoning and will. So, when you're in the state of intoxication, I'm talking about when you take alcohol. Look at the dangers. I'm not even going there. I'm not going there today. When you take alcohol, when you take drugs, when you induce yourself into that state of mind, you are again into a state whereby you have no reasoning power and you have no ability for the will. The lack of power of reasoning and the will is taken away in the state of that intoxication or drug-induced state of mind. So, the waking state, let's go back to the waking state. We'll come back to the others again in a minute. In the waking state is therefore a very important aspect of our being. Whatever achievements we can affect must be in the waking state, because it is then that we have self-awareness, and this awareness creates self-determination. Very important point from a spiritual point of view. It is in the waking state that we create achievement, and through achievement, through this awareness rather, a state of self-determination. Why? Because it is self-determination which serves as the foundation of our reasoning power and our volitional power. If you say, I have free will, And if you say, I have the ability to choose, and I am self-determined, well, that is where the foundation is. Self-determination serves, makes the foundation of our reasoning power and volitional power. So, what distinguishes the human level from the subhuman level? The power of reasoning and the power of free will. I want to make sure I'm clear with you. When I say subhuman, meaning, first of all, below the level of consciousness, meaning at the subconscious level, but I also mean those other species beyond those who do not have the human ability, the human capacity. So there is no power of reasoning and the power of will. On the subconscious level, we are guided by instincts, just like animals are. Animals are guided by instincts. But that is at the subconscious level. But on the conscious level, we have the power of the will and the power of reasoning that prevails. And there can be no power of the will, no volition without the power of judgment, meaning the power of reason. It is through reason that we judge. All progress on the human level results from this volition, which is associated with the power of judgment. We see things at the same time we judge things. The eyes perceive and the mind judges whether it is good for us or not. Pleasure or that which is pleasant is not necessarily good. The cultivation of intellectual life, the cultivation of moral life, ethical life, spiritual life, which is our concern, all of which distinguish a human individual is possible only in the waking state. So everything what I've just said about the notion of intellectual life, moral life, ethical life, and so on, or spiritual life, is all possible only when you are awake in the waking state. So, now, just as the subconscious level is below the ego consciousness, similarly, we may ask the question, is there a level above the ego consciousness that is going beyond the ego consciousness? And what must we do if we want to reach that level that is beyond, above the ego consciousness? We call that the level of unity or the level of the Supreme Being. What happens there? Is it possible? And in order for us to make that connection, if we want to reach that level of unity beyond the ego consciousness, then we have to do it by exercising our reasoning power, and willpower, which we completely get rid of and rid of ourselves of during the other levels. So the level of ego consciousness has one problem. The ego. How do you go beyond the ego? We know how to go below the ego, right? You've just noticed that, right? Waking consciousness, dream consciousness, and then the causal state or dreamless consciousness or the deep sleep. These are all below the ego consciousness. But our quest is from duality to unity. All those areas I describe is that of the duality. So before I go any further, can you imagine? Can you well imagine the struggle that we have? Every single day, that's our experience. Waking, dreaming, dreamless, and then we emerge again. from the dreamless to the dream, back to the waking, back to the same rigmarole, the same pattern, every day down, going on and on and on and on. Unless an individual says, I want to go beyond my ego consciousness, beyond the ego, above, I want to transcend it, then what are my options? Well, let's talk about those options in a minute. But remember one thing, because this is a prevalent condition in our society in many places, that by taking drugs or submitting to other such chemical alteration of the mind, what happens? There is this group of people, and some of them are very educated people, and some of them are even scientists in that domain who are preaching, and they say, all this business about going beyond the ego and experiencing something people call spiritual, or it is going into another plane of experience and understanding. Well, you don't need to be spiritual. You can take drugs. You can take drugs. And if you take certain form of drugs, it will create that experience, even though it may be hallucinations or hallucinogens and many other forms. That notion exists, and many people get hooked to these drugs in thinking that is the experience that we are seeking about and talking about. So by taking drugs or making yourself go or allowing the chemical alteration of the mind through drugs, guess what happens? We lose that precious element of consciousness which makes us self-aware and self-determined. No person who takes drugs or who has a chemically altered mind can claim to be self-aware and self-determined, which is what enables us to cultivate our intellectual, moral, and spiritual lives. The moment we lose self-awareness, we become nobodies. That's why the notion of taking drugs is so dangerous. Not only at the health, mind, and brain level, we totally destroy this ability, but it actually destroys you, the human being. Our beloved Imam has warned us about this type of tendencies over and over again. So stay away from those things, because they are so damaging, you may not be able to come out. When you damage your brain through these negative habits, you think by chemically altering your brain, you can get spiritual experience. You are sadly mistaken. Because if that was the case, why would you wake up for early morning prayers? You take those drugs and get the experience. It's not happening. It's not a reality. Because a chemically altered mind has many other reactions, and one of the reactions is that you're damaging the brain by all kinds of things when you're taking drug and alcohol, which is also a drug. Maybe many people think alcohol is relaxing, a glass of wine is relaxing, or there's not much alcohol in the wine, so it's okay to take. And the notion is, it is the alcohol in those beverages that creates that kind of artificial experience that you think that is real for you. But in real fact, remember, alcohol is a drug. It's not a drink. Just like those other drugs that we know of, whether they, whatever they are, whether it's cocaine or it's derivatives or crystal meth or whatever other drugs you talk about. Look at the physiological reaction and experience of those drugs in your consciousness and the brain. In the same way, alcohol is a drug. Don't fool yourself by thinking that is what makes you really important and modern, like the Imam said to us in a farman long ago. That's the notion of people whose intellect are frankly not functioning. Like it says in the Quran, yakilun, wallah yakilun. There is a malfunction. There is a malfunction in your intelligence. Your intellect is not functioning right, and therefore making the wrong decisions. You cannot get any experience by taking drugs of any kind, except to damage yourself to the nth degree and then becoming like an animal. Because you have no capacity of being self-aware, you cannot develop an intellectual, moral, and spiritual component of your life. And the moment you lose self-awareness, you become like an animal and worse. In fact, animals are better because they function by that instinct. You will be even below the animal. You become nobodies, really nobodies. Even though within your chemically altered mind, you might think that something is happening, but nothing is happening. It's all a delusion and illusion. So instead, we must go not below the ego consciousness, you must go beyond the ego consciousness. And that is where the notion of spirituality arises. I had to necessarily today give you these details because people are under the illusion to think that it is just so easy to transcend the ego like that. So far I've spoken in general terms. And to go beyond the ego consciousness and to get this higher level of consciousness that leads us to unity, we have been told that we have to emphasize certain qualities in us, those qualities that will help us yearn for that level of experience, for that level of unity, for that level of truth. Unless the mind moves away from the physical, temporal, to the eternal, you cannot reach that state of unity. Are you following me? You can take your mind below the level of waking consciousness, and you know what that is. But for the mind to go beyond, above, at the level of the Atma, at the level of the soul, you've got to be self-aware, you've got to have your reasoning capacity, you've got to have your willpower, and in order to achieve the notion of where you yearn for that experience and go beyond the ego consciousness, there must be something in you that allows you to want to go there. Imam Sultan Muhammad said to us, just like a child separated from the mother yearns to go to the mother. Remember this. A child separated from the mother yearns to go to the mother. Well, what about you? What is your yearning? Going to bed, the dream state, the dreamless state, living off your nightmares and ignorances within that below level? Or do you want to go to the ultimate superconscious level? Excuse me, I'm using the word superconscious to mean to that level of spirituality and spiritual awareness. So here's the key. Spiritual awareness. The human being has to spiritualize themselves in order to go beyond the ego consciousness. That's why mystics always tell us, your ego is on the way. Now that could be a negative thing when people are in self-denial, when people function only at the level of the ego. And trust me, in this level, in this age of existence where human society live in this age we call Kalju. There are plenty of those. Plenty of those. And you know very well, at the workplace and elsewhere, when you meet what they call egotistic people, you know what that means. You know that experience. So we always say to ourselves, you have to go beyond the ego. Now here we anchor the notion of spiritualizing oneself. And what is the process of spiritualization? The process of spiritualization is this. Let me give you an example. If you want to spiritualize yourself, then you go to follow the direction of He who can give you that experience, just the same way as you give yourself the experience during your dream state and dreamless state. So, how do you create that journey? Let me give you this example. If you take a needle and you want a string to go through that needle, then what happens? That thread, you take a thread and you want to make to the eye of the needle. But if that thread has many loose ends, loose fibers that come out of the end, do you think you'll be able to thread that needle? No. You have to chop all those loose ends, all those loose fibers, make sure the thread is itself one before it goes into the hole. You can thread it. Here's a simple example that tells us that this is how we must be. What is that reflection of? We have to overcome the ego consciousness. And the way we overcome the ego consciousness is to make sure that we are able to cut those threads that are stopping us going through the process. Cultivate yearning for what? What are you yearning for? What are you yearning for? Let me ask you this. What are you yearning for? Are you yearning for physical experiences? Good food, good physical entertainment, satisfying our animal self, and all of that? They're all part of this, what we just spoke about. Are you yearning for the eternal? Malabapa says to us, your soul is eternal. Are you yearning for it? Are you desiring it? Let me put it to you another way. How hungry are you? If you are not hungry for the eternal, then you will be a prisoner of the temporal. Meaning, you live your waking life, you live the way it is, you experience the material world through your ego consciousness and keep feeding that ego consciousness with all your material experiences, then go to bed and sleep and relive those dreams. I haven't even gone to explain to you how this imagination and emotion can be rootless in your dreams. And then go into the dreamless state, the deep sleep state, where your real self, your soul, that spark, experiences that ignorance, where you are actually nothing. And then you come back to the dream state, and you may live some nightmares there because of the imagery of the imagination. Then you wake up in the morning, and you say, oh my God, I didn't sleep very well this time. Or if someone says to you, by the way, did you hear that, explosion last night? And you might say, no, I know nothing about it because I was asleep, meaning you were into the deep sleep where you had no connection with the outside. Is that what experience is for? Is that what the Ruh and the Atma are supposed to go through? Is that what the soul is supposed to go through? Just the waking state, the dream state, the deep sleep state, and make this migration day in, day out, without realizing your ultimate aspect of yourself, that spark, that soul, that Atma, that reality. And what does our faith says? Needless to remind you. How many times, as our beloved Imam says, only the soul is eternal. Do you know what happens when a person does not achieve the realization of the Atma at that higher level? And when that person dies, what happens? What happens to that level of the dream, of the dream state and the level of the causal state? If you knew what happened to that, trust me, you would not be wasting your time in the material world simply for the material well-being. You would be making an effort to yearn for that eternal. That's why I say to you in the beginning of my lecture, there are details about the waking, details about the dream level of our experience, and details about the dreamless state that we need to know. In a sense, you need to know about them so that when this soul exits the body and you have not achieved any kind of spiritual realization, you did not spiritualize your life while you were alive, then what happens after death? Do you really think you can achieve by your illusions and delusions of the material and beyond, what is awaiting for us in the hereafter? So I say to you, you must ask yourself how to yearn for this eternal. And of course, there are certain disciplines that we have to bring in life in order to achieve that higher state of realization, to go beyond the ego. And one of them, of course, is humility. Look, you know very well that in this media of explanation, I'm talking about in my Zoom session today like this, I cannot go into those specific details because in our tariqah, those spiritual matters are very individual and very personal. So I cannot go into those details, but I'm speaking very generally. And I hope that you understand at the individual level is for you to make that relationship. I would love to do it, but it would not be appropriate because it's individual, it's personal, it's private, and that's the way spiritual matters are. But I can talk generally. So how do we go about it? How do we go about it? If we can overcome desire for that which is transitory, in other words, if we can overcome feeding the ego, the desire the ego brings into the material plane, then what can we say? What can we do? How do we go about it? Well, first, we do not deviate from our moral principles. Look, I realize it's 10 o'clock Vancouver time, and there is a bit left for me to actually complete all of this. But we may have a part 2, or I may take it on next week during the question and answer period, so we don't take a whole session for it. But let me just continue for a few minutes so that I'm able to just bring this part to a conclusion. Remember, I've spoken a lot about this duality. I have mentioned intermittently about the notion of that unity. But at the same time, we haven't quite gotten to that unity yet. We are still in the basis of making ourselves spiritual. We are spiritualizing ourselves. So the first thing we need to do is do not deviate from our moral principles. We try to be sincere, truthful, helpful, charitable, and at the same time continue to carry out whatever duties the Imam has given us in our tariqah. This is the notion of spiritualizing ourselves. In humility, we say, Hazar Imam, guide me. Mawla, show me the path. And the Imam says, Are you following the ethics of our faith by being sincere, honest, truthful, charitable, helpful? Are you putting the ethics of our faith in practice? Because those are the ones that allows the ego to melt down. You have to melt the ego, not kill it. You cannot do that, but it melts down. In other words, you allow the ego to basically open up so you can go beyond it. And these guidance our beloved Imam gives us. Remember, the Imam is concerned with the spiritual aspect of the murids, and it is the talim of the Imam that guides the murid to spiritual enlightenment. So I ask you, and I'm saying to people at a very basic level, this is what this lecture was all about, to say, are you understanding why we need to spiritualize ourselves? And that is, first and foremost, you have to have moral principles, without which you cannot achieve any spiritual progress whatsoever. Whatsoever. You cannot be immoral, unethical, and all of that, and hope you can achieve any kind of spiritual understanding. You won't. If you're immoral, if you are unethical and all that does, it feeds your animal part called nafs amara. I'm not going into the technical terms. So moral principles, the ethics of our faith. In that context, remember, this is the talim and the holy farmans of the Imam. So, why do we say moral principle? Because by honoring moral principle, we hope to get the most out of the life in which we are living. Moral principles play a very powerful role in spiritual development, because it is moral principle which is the basis of reasoning power as well as spiritual power. The moment we deviate from moral principle, what happens? You jeopardize your whole life completely. Completely. This is one of the things you will see throughout the Quran, throughout the Hadith, throughout the holy farmans of the Imam, throughout the ginans, and there are ginans upon ginans that speaks about these moral principles. Because if you jeopardize your whole life, you're dead, you're finished. So we must be firm, absolutely firm in these principles and continue to live in our present situation in accordance with the guidance and the hakikat our beloved Imam is giving us and presenting to us. Only then we can hope that we can get the best from this life and at the same time realize the shortcoming, its inherent shortcoming in life, because the Imam makes us aware of that. And we shall think, or hopefully, that deep in my heart, very deep in my heart, I am longing for the eternal life. Deep in my heart, I am longing for this joy that is inexpressible, that I cannot get through drugs or through my ego consciousness. I cannot get it into my dream state. I cannot get it into my dreamless or deep sleep state. I can only get it into the state above. We must rid ourselves of the dominion of the ego consciousness. How is that going to happen? So let me ask you this. Do you have the power to rid yourself of your ego consciousness? Do you? Obviously, we don't, because when we go to sleep, guess where we go? And you've seen it. So why can you not go beyond? The power of this ego consciousness is so powerful, and it deludes you into this dimension of existence that we call a Maya. Well, that's a whole lecture in itself. what is Maya? Now people say Maya is this illusion and delusion. Well, it is, but it is. You know, Maya it's also a divine force. It's a divine power. And for the mind to go beyond Maya is just another thing. So how do you rid yourself of the domination of ego consciousness? The way we rid ourselves of the domination of ego consciousness is to follow a spiritual course. Now, I have said a lot about spiritual things in my earlier lectures in many different ways. Today's lecture, in a way, was something to say that, look, before you get to that spiritual course, understanding this was because there were many messages and questions I got to say, what about these experiences during our human existence? The existence of waking and dreamless sleep, and when we go into our cycle when we are in bed. Now, do you see one thing? We go to sleep, but you have to be awakened again if you are dedicated to early morning prayers. You have to be awakened. So many people say, well, can't I say my prayers when I go to sleep and stay asleep? Yeah, you can say your prayers when you go to sleep, only to the extent that you haven't lost the ego consciousness. Because once you lose the ego consciousness, it's like dropping that remote that was in your hand. You drop off to sleep. You no longer have any control. No will, no reasoning, no volition. Then what happens? You can't do anything. That doesn't count. Remember, progress is only made when you are awake. Because you exercise your will. And you exercise your reason. And that is the way in which your engagement counts. So you can see the opposite cannot be true. Otherwise you will never know. The power of self-awareness comes when you are awake. So we have to say in this, everything that I've said, that do you understand the spiritual path that our beloved Imam has taught us and our tariqah teaches us? Because it is not possible to follow spiritual development. And I'm saying this to many people who basically do not understand the basis of it. Remember, the mind is one indispensable instrument for every kind of experience, every kind of cognition, from the lowest to the highest, from the grossest object to the ultimate reality. It is through the mind that we know it. I say cognition, knowing it. When we perceive or experience an object, there invariably occurs, as I mentioned before, modification. Modification in the mind, in the form of that object. The mind conforms to the object, and that is how knowledge is possible. The mind conforms to that object, and that is why knowledge is possible. What am I saying to you? Why do I say the mind is necessary for that? So now, what is the object? So, we are the subject. There is an object. The mind relates to the object by modification. We call it modification of the mind, making that connection. This is why, in my yesterday's lecture, in the notion of the spiritual essence, I mentioned in no uncertain terms that the connection that we make with our beloved Imam, through the farmans of the Imam, through the guidance of the Imam, through what our beloved Imam tells us what to do and what not to do in our tariqah. And I mentioned to you, everything we do is related to the soul. It's related to the soul. And everything we aspire for is intended for the soul to benefit from. Because everything else will stay into this world. Nothing will remain. Nothing will remain. Because only the soul is eternal. So, trying to realize deep down our relationship with divinity, with the Supreme Being, with Mawla, with the Nur of Mawla, is absolutely paramount. Absolutely paramount. The only way to remove this ignorance is through the grace and mercy that the Imam gives us. Otherwise, you know what happens? Your ego consciousness, your ego, will be so much fed with the illusion that this world gives you, and it is going to create an utter destruction. Utter destruction. Let me explain very quickly in 2 minutes, and then we can go to the next phase. Do you remember during the Silver Jubilee what our beloved Imam said about this imbalance? And I'm trying to remember by memory. Look what he said, and I quote him from my memory. If the unadulterated pursuit of material well-being becomes the exclusive objective of life, it will engender an evil vacuum of destructive forces, unquote. This is our beloved 49th Imam, Maulana Hazar Imam, telling us what will happen if we allow this tendency of the ego fed through materialism and ignoring our spiritual side will happen. This is a revelation that a lot of people don't realize. Remember these words. Remember these words. If the unadulterated pursuit of material well-being continues, it will become an evil vacuum of destructive forces. Do you want that evil vacuum that will destroy your whole existence? Then we must live in accordance with the direction and guidance of our beloved Imam, where he says, Deen and Dunya are intertwined. Everything you breathe in the Dunya must have a spiritual component with it. Even eating is a spiritual activity if you know how to make it. Thinking, living, breathing, walking, whatever activities we do materially is a part of our spiritual component, and there is spirituality involved with it. Just a simple reminder to tell you, that is, remember when I was giving you the example of what Imam Begum said in the Ginan? You breathe 21,000 breaths a day, and you breathe 900 breaths per hour, 15 breaths every minute. How many of those breaths are really have become meaningful or profitable, or are they all wasted breath? This refers to how much you are yearning for the love, guidance, and eternity of your soul. Love and guidance from the Imam. How hungry are you? You know, another meaning of faith when we speak about the faith is hunger. Are you hungry for the spiritual? Are you hungry for the love of the Imam? Are you hungry? Are you yearning for the hereafter? If so, then that spiritual path will open for you under the guidance of the Imam. Mullah Bapa himself is that supreme being. There is no other. There is no other. He is it. We in our tariqah, when we leave this world, we aspire to become one with Him spiritually. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Meaning, we want to become one with His nur. And our whole process of spirituality is founded and related to the path of nur. So let me say this to you in conclusion. If you are yearning, desiring, wanting, thirsty, hungry for the eternal, and your soul to reach that level of eternity, that ultimate state of consciousness, beyond the waking ego, beyond the dream state, beyond the causal or dreamless state, and you go to the fourth state, if you like, of that ultimate reality, that state of unity, there is only one path to take. And that path is the path of Sirat al-Mustaqim, meaning what? Wherever the Imam is, wherever Mola Bapa is, wherever his presence is, wherever he is there, that is the path. What does that mean? Mola Bapa himself is Sirat al-Mustaqim. In the dua, when you say Sirat al-Mustaqim, when you think about Sirat al-Mustaqim, say, oh Lord, guide us to the straight path. Mola Bapa is Sirat al-Mustaqim. Yearn for that. Desire for that. Want for that. Then what happens? If you are truthful, and you are following the principle, even your sleep becomes ibadah. Did you know what our beloved Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah says? Those who go to sleep with that awareness about their faith, in this case I'm saying the desire to be in Sirat al-Mustaqim, the desire to be with Mola Bapa himself, and realizing Mola Bapa himself is Sirat al-Mustaqim. So if you are looking for that straight path, you are looking, where is Sirat al-Mustaqim? Find out, where is Mola Bapa? Where is our beloved Imam? That is Sirat al-Mustaqim. And you know what? Take a Farman book. Open it. Read it before you go to sleep. When you wake up, during the daytime, during the evening, whenever you have a moment. The holy Farmans of the Imam is Sirat al-Mustaqim expressed. Inshallah, with Mola's mercy and grace and Mola Bapa's love for us, He will hold our hand into that Sirat al-Mustaqim. So we may always be with Him. And even our sleep, our waking life, our sleep, our dreamless sleep, our dream sleep, it all becomes ibadat. It all becomes profitable. Nothing is wasted. Do you remember the Farman? He who wakes up with my name, his whole day passes in enlightenment. So your waking life and your ego consciousness is in the right direction. It is in spiritual enlightenment. I'll stop here. It's been longer than I expected, but inshallah, the subject is complete. We may take questions if possible, if you are there. And as the host, Gulshan, expressed, next week, inshallah, we will take on. There have been so many questions and feedback. And I sincerely thank you, all of you, for your amazing feedback and your supportive feedback and the questions that you have raised and the request you have made for more explanations of things. With Mola's mercy and grace and your prayers, I, inshallah, will try my best to bring more clarification and explanation into these lectures as the times permit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gulshan.
Thank you, Dr. Hassam. That was very, very enlightening, and we've all learned a lot from you. Dr. Hassam, I would like to request you to give us some dua first. Before we do that, I would just like to tell everybody to remain muted so that we can hear the dua properly. We will have one person, and I will be that person this time, to say Ameen to the duas. But at the same time, I would like each and every one of you to say Ameen to these precious duas in your heart as a one, all of us being one unit. So, Bismillah.
May Mola Bapa bless everyone with staunchness in Dasam.
Ameen.
May Mola Bapa bless everyone with staunchness of Iman and strong faith.
Ameen.
May Mola Bapa bless everyone with Hakikati Samaj, which means the understanding of the true aspect of reality. May Mola Bapa bless everyone with Barakat, spiritually and materially.
Ameen.
May Mola Bapa bless everyone with the realization and the fulfillment of all your wishes, whether they be spiritual and material.
Ameen.
May Mola Bapa's Noor be with you in your ibadat, in your prayers, in your daily life, to guide you, to protect you, to keep you safe.
Ameen.
May every breath, every step you take, be taken in the glory, in the remembrance, in the praise, and in gratitude to Mola Bapa. May Mola Bapa accept your prayers.
Ameen.
May Mola Bapa give you the ability to accept your gratitude, to say shukrana. Every step that you take, every breath that you express should be a breath of gratitude, because that is the true nature of worship and recognition that we are nothing and Mawla is everything.
Ameen.
May Mawla's Noor be with us in every aspect of our being, from our material to the highest of the spiritual. May Mawla bless us with His Noor.
Ameen.
May Mawla always keep us in the path of Noor, which is the path of Sirat al-Mustaqim.
Ameen.
And may Mawla always bless us with His remembrance in everything that we do. Because His remembrance is a sure way to be protected and receive success in everything and in anything that we undertake. Mawla bless us with Mushkila Sam. And may Mawla bless us all with Zahiri Batini Dida. Ameen.
Ameen. Ameen. Thank you so much, Dr. Hassam, for all your time and your dedication and your service. And may Mawla give you lots of barakat
Ameen.
and happiness.
Ameen.
Service, and give you the strength to do more service for humanity and for the world Jamaat.
Ameen.
Mawla always give you barakat in your home,
Ameen.
for your family. Ameen.
Ameen.
Do you think we have time for just a few short questions?
Yeah. I have the time if the...
So, if everybody's okay with that, I'm going to ask him a few questions. If you're tired, you can, this will be recorded, but I think they might enjoy having some questions answered. So the first question is there a difference between the soul and the spirit?
No. In our terminology, from the perspective that I use today, soul was actually meant to be spirit, to mean Atma, or to mean Ruh.
Thank you. The second question is there a concept of pluralism of the soul? That is, what is the relationship of one soul with another soul?
The relationship, well, I don't have the word pluralism, I understand correctly in that context, but the relationship between the souls, it's not physical. It's not physical. Because once we shed our physical shell, the soul's relationship is always with the divine. Now that does not mean that we do not have a relationship with the spiritual world where other souls are. Quite the contrary, we do. But the relationship is very different. It's not that of husband, wife, child, parent, brother and sister, or in a kind of relationship we conceive materially. Because material relationship is material. And the soul, as I said by nature, is a spiritual, luminous entity. And it manifests itself through the physical. And what makes our physical relationship is the karmas that exist within the soul. In other words, the karmas that we bring with us that creates the relationship of husband, wife, child with parents, relatives, friends, and everything else. The karmas plays a very important role. I have said in one of my lectures that I will, inshallah, give a very detailed aspect lecture on this notion of karma. And you will see that throughout in the Quran, in the Hadith, in Ginans, in the Farmans of the Imam, we can relate to this powerful concept of understanding so that we know what we mean by karma in the world. And having said that, let me just add the punchline. The punchline is this. In my lecture today, once we achieve that fourth level, in a sense beyond the dreamless sleep, beyond that causal state, we reach that fourth level, what I call the aspect of unity. At the level of that unity, guess what happens? All the karmas get burnt out. They all get burnt out. And remember, to reach the state of that unity means what? You follow the path of Sirat al-Mustaqim in your spiritual development as our beloved Imam guides our physical and spiritual quest. And in that course of the guidance, because our beloved Imam is directing us towards his nur, that experience will burn all the karma completely, which means no more physical existence, therefore no more physical relation. The only relation you then have is the spiritual relationship with Mola Bapa himself, even in the hereafter.
Thank you. The next question is, can Dr. Hassam help understand Hazar Imam's Diamond Jubilee Farman in Toronto, where Mola Bapa says, as you live in this world, your intellect lives in the other world?
Yes, I do remember this quote from the Farman. And I know there was several requests that came that asked me if I could explain much deeper the notion of the intellect as a facet of the faith, and then the intellect as an expression of the spirit, and also the notion of how the human will is related to the notion of the intellect and so on. So I think I'm going to reserve the response of this question to that particular lecture, which I hope to do it not in the next session, because it will be a Q&A session, but perhaps in that Monday session. I'm not sure that we have reached the Q&A level there, but the next actual lecture will be on this notion of the intellect. So hold your horse so I can take that properly under consideration.
Right. The next question is, what is the difference between a dream and a vision? And there's a specific addendum to this. They're wondering if you could give some examples.
Okay. So an illusion can well happen when you are physically awake. In other words, on the waking state, the ego consciousness could lead you to believe into an illusion. And illusion comes in many forms. Let's say somebody gives you negative information. Somebody makes you believe something that is not really true, and you actually believe it. In other words, you are conned to believe into something that is not there. In a way, that is also falling for an illusion. On the other hand, there can be some chemical alteration of your brain through drugs and other things that's causing you hallucination. That is a form of illusion. What I'm saying to you is...
The word was vision. Dr. Hassam, sorry, the word was the difference between a vision and a dream.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood the word. So, okay, a vision and a dream. You cannot have vision in a normal sense of the term in a dream, because as I explained to you, our awareness, in other words, that spark, the real you, goes into the subconscious mind, and when it enters the subconscious, meaning it enters that dimension of impressions and tendencies and memories and experiences that are all stored in there. And when you enter that sea of all of that, the spark is reliving the true imagination and emotion, the manifestation of all those things that are part of that dream state. So that actually, in a sense, it's also illusory. It's basically a dream. In the dream, you may think it's real, but when you come out of it, it's not real. Now, the notion of vision is different. It may well be that someone is gifted with a certain vision, meaning it doesn't come from the physical realm of the human experience, but it comes from, let's say, for lack of better terms, it comes from a realm that is from the realm of the spirit, from the realm that is non-physical. And it is a divine gift to have those visions. Meaning, the vision can be about oneself, could be about others, could be about an event, could be about something that is to happen into the future. And this notion of vision can also happen very rarely into dreams, when you enter the dream state. And that is known as a prophetic dream. Now, there is the whole history of Prophet Joseph into the Quran and the dreams that he had and the interpretation and the symbols behind the dream. Now, I didn't cover that today because it didn't fall into the ambit of my presentation. But the notion of a vision is a very powerful one if it is true. And normally the vision happens from outside oneself, unless a person is spiritually elevated, then he or she has access to a level of information that translates into vision and is able to express that vision. So the question was the difference between a vision and dream. Is that right? Yeah. So now remember what I said in the dream. Those are the unmanifest impressions of your life that's been stored there that you are reliving in the dream, in that state of awareness. So they are not real by any means. That's why they are called dreams. But some dreams can be very real. And maybe somewhere down explaining in some other lectures, we can probably get into that realm to see what do we mean by these prophetic dreams. Just for your information, I want you to know there is a large body of literature in the Hadith literature of the Holy Prophet. Many people used to go to the Holy Prophet and ask them about dreams. And the Holy Prophet used to interpret and tell them about their dreams. And there was one person by the name of Ibn Sirin, and he apparently compiled a manual of dream interpretation given by the Holy Prophet. So again, as I said, it's there, and we probably may want to just explore it just for the sake of understanding some of the things the Holy Prophet said about the notion of dream. But remember, in our Ginans also, our peers have often used many times the symbolism of dream to say things, to explain things to us, so that we don't confuse between those unrealistic, untrue dreams with the realities of our spirituality.
Thank you. Can we do two small questions to more?
Yes, please, I'm here.
One is a different topic now. Is this one, it says, Dr. HASSAM, just wondering if you can discuss the significance of ALWAAZ, which is coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, it's an important celebration. And again, I would say if you can perhaps wait till the Q&A session next week. I've seen that question again when we had the month of Ramzan that was going on, and questions about Eid I haven't answered, and hopefully in the Q&A I can take it up for the greater audience.
Okay, and then the next question again is this one. It says, and it's only part of one question, but I thought we could see if we could address a little bit of this. What is the best source, or what are some good sources to find the esoteric meaning of the Quran other than Mola Bapa himself or our holy Ginans?
Well, that's a difficult question because in a way the question itself is contradictory. But if I understand the question in the spirit of saying that I don't have access to Mola Bapa to know the meanings, and I don't understand the Ginans, is there any other published sources there that I can rely upon? Well, we do know that there are many of the teachings of our Da'is that have been interpreted by the authority of the Imam. And I wouldn't say that is of the whole Quran, but there are selection of pieces and verses of the Quran that many of our Da'is have explained to us. People like Al-Muyaddin Al-Shirazi, people like Hamiduddin Kirmani, many of the Fatimid Da'is, a lot in the Fatimid literature. But these are Ismaili Da'is and Ismaili missionaries of the time who, by the authority of the Imam, like for example, Qazi Noman in the Da'im al-Islam, he quotes many, many verses of the Quran, and he says that Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam said this, Imam Muhammad Baqir said this, Imam Maulana Murtaza Ali say this, and so on. So he's quoting some of the Imams of the earlier period and said this is what the Imam has said. And we take those to be, of course, because there are verses of the Quran in which the Imam is explained. And an example that I've often given is that the verse that is in our dua in the 5th part about amanatikum. The word amanat meaning the trust, the trust of God in the human hand that has to be given back in God's hand. And that was the dasam. Or in the Quranic language, you might say it is the zakat and the ushra Allah and the khums, which Imam Sultan alayhi salam in the Farman. So we go to this interpretation because the Imam says in the Farman, these three things are in the Quran, and the Imam said that means that is the Imam's right and that is the dasam. So in that way, I think there is a possibility to outline a few of the things. In the Holy Tendiyati Javad Mardi, in the True Meaning of Religion book, in Qazi Noman's book about the Code of Conduct, and many other books published by the IIS, where it talks about Ismaili understanding of Islam. Many Quranic verses come forth by the authority of the Imam, we have to remember, and we understand those meanings given by the Imam at that time.
Thank you. That's an excellent answer. The last question is, Dr. Hassam, you touched on the consequences if we do not realize the spirituality in this life. Can you expand it in future sessions, and what happens after death? And I know it's a long...
Yes.
You can just spend as much as you want on it.
Yes. Well, simply to say, there is our animal self and there is our spiritual self. Or in the language of Imam Sultan Ahmad Shah, so there is our animal self and our angelic self. So now the human being has to decide which direction I want to go. Now our tariqah is very clear, as our beloved Imam has said. Very clear. What's our purpose on earth? And we must understand that clearly through the farmans of the Imam. And knowing the holy farman of the Imam, we then take a willful, a volitional and decision to the use of the intellect to say, this is the direction I'm going to follow, because my animal self is transient and temporal, and my spiritual self is permanent and eternal. So you make that decision.
Now somebody's saying they could sit here till 4 o'clock, so I will keep on asking questions. I think we're all enjoying it. And so I've got the next one I have is, would you say that non-Ismailis, or really the question is, does this mean that non-Ismailis are not faithful since they do not have Imam?
Not at all. I think there is a way that you have to understand this in a holistic way. So let me just drive myself back a little backward, and make the first statement to say, remember, the whole of creation has come from the Nur of Hazar Imam. Okay? That is our position. And I'm answering it because the question refers to they don't have the Imam. The whole of creation is the creation of Hazar Imam. The whole creation has come from his Nur. Every single soul, every single living thing is sustained and supported by the Nur of Hazar Imam. Mawla Bappa himself is the Nur of creation. Nothing is outside his Nur. And that includes every human being and every human expression that you could say. Look at, for example, the Diamond Jubilee logo and message of the Diamond Jubilee. What did it say? It spoke about the unity of humanity. That comes from the Quran. The Quran is Mawla Bappa himself. The difficulty is in that question, because there is a part that says, are they not faithful? No. The question is that of spiritual evolution. How evolved and blessed will be the soul to come at a level whereby they recognize the Nur. Remember the ayat in the Quran? Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. Light upon light, Nurun ala Nur. Allah guides to his light whom he pleases. So, first thing, we absolutely do not make judgment on others about their faith. It's against our faith. It's against the farmans of the Imam. It's against the way in which Islam as a faith relates itself to others. Means to other faiths and other traditions. Because it says in the Quran, if Allah had wanted, He could have made the whole of mankind one community and practicing one faith. But He did not do so because the Quran says, Allah says He knows what we don't know. Another way that I would say this is to say, by Allah's grace, I would say by Mawla's grace, and I'll explain to you in a moment, okay? I'm not being fanatical or evangelistic. I know some people might think so, but if you follow the logic, you will see it's purely logical. But another way of saying this is this. Every human being, from a spiritual point of view, is placed into a psychological and spiritual environment and condition that will best profit their spiritual evolution. We are placed into a psychological and spiritual environment that best predisposes us for our spiritual evolution. In that way, Mawla's Noor covers every single human being in every way. And we are not in a position to understand that grace and that miracle because of our limited capacity. What we do understand, like all other faith traditions in the world, that people are practicing their faith on the basis of their understanding, which we, as Ismaili and Murids of the Imam, deeply respect and deeply understand where they are. So, when you look at the human religious practice in the world, there is, those practices of the faith that refers to the Semitic monotheism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, for example, which in the Quran are referred to Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book. But it doesn't stop there. You remember Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah's description that for thousands of years there have been other spiritual beings raised by the divine, guided by the divine, Sri Ram, Sri Krishna, Sri Buddha, Gautam Buddha, the wise men of China, Socrates in Greece, and so on. So all of these faiths are universally recognized in Islam and certainly also, of course, because the Imam is saying it, so we recognize in our tariqah. Now let me give you a very concrete example, because I could give a whole lecture on that. Let me give you something very concrete. I had the fortune of meeting one individual right here in Vancouver. I won't say his name because I don't have his permission to say it. And he was an elderly individual. And one day, I gave a lecture. He happened to be there. And then he asked someone to call me up, and he wanted to share one of his experiences. And I quickly ran because I'd love to listen from people. And he said to me that I liked your lecture about prayers today. This was a lecture on prayers. But he said, I have to tell you something amazing that happened in my life. And I said, please tell me. And I became very curious. So he said, when I was young, and I was I lived in the Indian subcontinent. And he said in those days, Burma and surrounding countries were kind of very much close and part of that subcontinent. And he said, I was very young, and my parents wanted to admit me to a school or a college there in the subcontinent, but they had some great worry and misgiving that the best school and colleges were Christian by nature, in a sense that you admit a child and the faith they practiced was Christianity, and these colleges had very strict rule about practicing Christianity, like going to Mass and going to church on Sunday and attending religious assemblies where they read the Bible and so on and so forth. So my parents were worried that on the one hand there is this amazing opportunity for education because it was the best education, but on the other hand, what about our faith? How will this child not be influenced by the influence of Christianity, so to speak? So they had this enormous worry in mind. It so happened, fortunately, Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah alayhi salam came, for the Didar, for the Jamaat. They had an opportunity. In those days, it was very fluid and very open. And they presented themselves in front of the Imam. And the parents expressed this concern. And immediately, our beloved Imam asked this individual and said, "Do you know your dua?" And he said, "Yes, Khudavi, I know my dua." So Mola Bapa told him and told the parents, put him into the best schools. Don't worry about the influence that you think will kind of influence him. Mola Bapa tells him, when you go to the assemblies, or when you go to the church, or when you do whatever they do for their religious thing, you think of me through your dua. Say your dua. None of this will affect you. And then, what this individual told me was amazing, and this is the punchline. He said to me, Imam Sultan Muhammad told him, he said, "Listen, when a Christian, a Jew, a Hindu, a Zoroastrian, whoever out there, when they say their prayers, when they do their ibadah, those prayers, the Imam says, goes this way, that way, that way, that way, that way, that way, and eventually comes to me. And I then answer those prayers. But when you say your dua, it comes directly to me." Are we in a position to say who's a faithful or not? You understand my point? So, when I say that Imam Mola Bapa is the Imam of the whole creation, his nur encompasses everything. So, all those who pray to God, not knowing where is that manifestation on earth, in whichever way they have it, everything goes to the nur of Hazrat Imam, and it is Mola Bapa himself who answers that. And I have proof of this, what I have just said, into some of the farmans, some of the early farmans that are not read in this day and age, unfortunately. But this is my response. So, anyone who prays sincerely and seeks the path of enlightenment, whether they recognize or not, it is Mawla who comes to their help and answers it and guides them. They are not left without divine assistance. How Mawla does that, that is his miracle. But what happens to us? We have to be grateful and submitted and know, oh yeah, this is the blessing that Mawla has given us.
This next question, I think we can all learn from. It says, please ask him how to develop severe hunger for our beloved Mawla.
How to develop spiritual hunger?
Severe hunger, like a longing.
Or longing, yes. Well, let me tell you this. The first principle is dasan. You know why? Because dasan will create detachment from the material realm. Dasan will allow your ego consciousness to be detached from all these material fetters. And when you detach from the material fetters, when the ego consciousness becomes detached by the power of the song, the mind will long for the truth. And when the mind begins longing for the truth, there will be this inner miracle where, because of the song, it will create this want, this desire, this longing to transcend the ego consciousness. And it does that by following the next principle, that is of the dua. Because the dua becomes only valid and acceptable unless, acceptable because of the song. So first comes the song, and then comes everything else, particularly dua ibadah. Without the song, it's going to be, if not impossible, just impossible. Because it's like building something, building a house, building whatever, no foundation. It will collapse. It will collapse. Sometimes it's a hard reality, but you know what? I'm not going to beat around the bush. That is the fact. And I've said it many times. This is a principle in every single religion on this planet. Because every religion, in the end of the day, came from the one source. And every single prophet has taught this haqiqah, this reality. So I would say to you that this notion of love, devotion, hunger, yearning for Hazrat Imam can only come, will only come, if your dassault is there. Now, I fully, completely realize that in the world in which we live, and the challenges that we have related to dassault, and I mean, many people sometimes don't have employment, many people are very limited in income, many people have difficulty when it comes to financial matters, and and it's not like they don't understand or they don't want to comply or to submit the song, but they have those personal challenges, and they sometimes feel that because of what I have said, that they are left out, or maybe there is another way, or maybe they think that they are doomed because they are not able to give the song, and if the song is that criteria, then what should they do? Now, I know that was not the question asked, but I'm saying it because I don't want people to selectively say, well, you say that there is no the song, you are done, you are sunk. Yes, I'm absolutely saying that because our holy imams and our holy peers have said it. They have even said the root problem of all your problems is the lack of the song. And therefore, we understand that implicitly and explicitly. But let me say this too, that the Imam is the most merciful, most compassionate. And errors in the song can be forgiven through Mukikamariyas, Mukanikamariyas. I want to get those processes because this isn't a platform to do it, but I'm just mentioning that. But people who have that difficulty about the song, if they really are honest, sincere, meaningful about it, the thing is this. In your prayers, in your du'as, seek the help of the Imam. Is that not what our dua says? At a time of difficulty, seek the help of the living Imam. Tawassalu indal masaibi maulakum. So I'm asking those individuals who may have that question, and I know in the past there have been questions like that I haven't addressed. Are you really seeking that help? Do you think if you seek that help would not be forthcoming? I can assure you, there is no such thing where help can never be forthcoming, not from the Imam. Because that is in our dua. You did not write the dua. I did not write the dua. The dua is given by the Imam. And the Imam specifically says, you want help, you call me. Look at the other farman that I often quote. And the farman that says, it is farman made in the United States. Our beloved Imam says, call on the tasbih. Call on the tasbih. When you need courage. When you need support. When you need wisdom. When you need enlightenment to deal with issues that you have to deal with every day. Call on the tasbih. Who said this? It is our beloved Imam who said this. When he said call on the tasbih, are we getting the sense? It's like Mola Bapa telling us, which is exactly the case. He says, you know what? When you need support, when you need courage, when you need wisdom, when you need enlightenment in the issues you have to deal with every day, call me. What a grace. What a mercy from Hazrat Imam. What a love from Hazrat Imam. What a beneficence from Hazrat Imam to his murid. Are you understanding this relationship? Mola Bapa said, call me. Okay, you have problem giving the song? You have problem really articulating your faith in practice by your dasan, your dua, your ibadat? You are facing difficulties in that? Call me. Call me. And this farman, amongst many others, it's an immense, immense grace from heaven that Mola is giving us to say, call me and I will help you solve your problem. I will give you the wisdom. I will give you the courage to go through it. I will give you the support that you need. Now, please tell me if I'm failing in my explanation or failing to give you the right ingredient for you to really muster and use in the practice of our faith. Because sometimes we are helpless. Sometimes we need this support. We need that courage. We are helpless. But the Imam said, call me. Well, please think about this. And people who have difficulties in matters of the practice of the faith and fulfilling out their duties into the faith, understand we always rely on the mercy, grace, compassion, love from Hazrat Imam upon us. Because that is our salvation in this world and in the hereafter.
So this next question is a little bit, it's about the song as well. It says, verse 349 of Ananta Taro states that we should submit the 10th part to the 10th manifestation of the Lord. As Ismailis, we give another 2.5% to the peer for a total of 1/8 for the song. Alhamdulillah. I have seen a firman by Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah sallallahu alayhi wasallam that states that one day the song will be abolished. Please correct me if this information is not correct. Assuming it is, my question is as follows. Since the Ginan states, submit the 10th part to the 10th manifestation of the Lord, has the amount of the song that has been given over the ages sequentially decreasing over the ages with each aftar? For example, along these lines was a whole given at the beginning, 100%, and he's referring to Prophet Muhammad. Then a half plus 2.5% to the second aftar, then 1/3 plus 2.5% to the third aftar, then 1/4 plus 2.5% to the fourth aftar, then 1/5 plus 2.5% to the fifth aftar, until finally, as Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah has stated, that eventually the song will be abolished. You have educated us that the song was given by Prophet Muhammad when he prostrated to the Nur of Ali at the time of creation. To me, that is 100% submission. I would be extremely interested in your explanation and thoughts about this.
The first thing I'd like to say that unfortunately it is not within anyone's purview to go into this notion about the sound in that way. I understand the question. I understand the curiosity. I understand where the person may have string together this thesis and basically said what they said, including this notion of the abolition. Look, I sincerely tell you, this is not an aspect of our practice that is within the purview of a murid or a mu'min, in a sense that that is entirely the purview of the Imam of the time and how he guides the Jamaat into the practice of the faith. And whether the song will be eventually abolished or not, when it will be, if at all, and so on and so forth, is 100% outside the scope of any individual, even to speculate, even to know, even to dig about it, because, as I said, if at all that notion floats or is there or not there, is not in the purview of the murid or mu'min to speculate. It is entirely the purview of the Imam of the time. Now, having said that, let me say this to you. The song is our link. It's our grace to the Imam. And because of the link of the song, we have our beloved Imam with us. Now, having said that, that means to say, there has never been a time, regardless of rates and percentages and this and that, regardless of whatever time period it might have been, the song has always existed, as you have stated, even before the creation. And that is also in Anantakaro, because you're referring to Anantakaro. It's there that says before the creation of the whole cosmos and the physical creation took place, the law of the song was the first one that was promulgated and manifested. And it continued throughout the creation and still continues today. So I would say that, for one thing, the principle is absolutely valid no matter what. I personally do not know where those rates stated come from. What I do know, whatever we are in our current period about those rates, it's stated, for example, in the Quran, it clearly says that there is the notion of Ushra Allah, which is 1/10, 10%, Khums, which is 1/5, 20%, and Zakat has been normalized to 2.5%. And based on the guidance of the Imam, our beloved Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah in his Holy Farman has said, these three things mentioned in the Quran, Zakat, Ushra Allah and Khums, all of them put together, they are the rights of the Imam, and that is what we call Dasan in our Tariqah. And that rate set by the Holy Peers and the Imam is exactly what you have described. 1/10 is 12.5%, and by definition given, 2.5% is the right of the Peer, which comes from the Imam, and 10% the right of the Imam that comes by virtue of this divine law. It's a divine law stated in the Quran. Other faiths, other religions also have this. When people speak about tithe means 1/10. Dashans also means that, 1/10, Dasmobag, and so on. So the principle is definitely there, no questions about it. But I would say it's a bit tricky to go backwards in the way that was expressed about one of the other. I have not seen that information. Maybe I have and I don't remember, it's not in front of me. But because this is such a sensitive and practical matter and foundational matter, I would say, though the curiosity is well acknowledged, but stick with what our tariqah and our beloved Imam guided us to fulfill our duties in accordance to them. And that is what we have done about the song from the past is exactly what we are expected to continue. This is our Imam's expectation that, we fulfill our religious duties and leave it at that. Because those other issues frankly, are not within the radar or purview of any individual, however informed they may be about where the song will be into the future. I just wish to end by saying that let us always pray that it never abolishes, because that is our lifeline with our Imam.
Thank you. That was an excellent answer. The next question is, somebody says, when Hazrat Imam says, only the faith of your forefathers will sustain you. Could you elaborate on this? And they're asking specifically that if somebody does not have faith in the here and now, in our present life, would that someone be sustained in the here and now very nicely on the shoulders of their forefathers and then be able to gain salvation?
I think I sense a sense of perhaps mixture into this question. You know, the notion of the faith of our forefathers is a very broad one in a sense that, first of all, you go to identify, you know, when we say our forefathers, which came from very many different traditions and very many different cultures over history and over the past. And you say, what is the common denominator with our forefathers? Because that refers to our ancestry, going all the way back to as far back as we can possibly take. So what is it that they did that our beloved Imam is saying that you should see what how they were as faithful and how they are now as they were as faithful. So obviously, first of all and foremost, we have to say to ourselves that yes, they practiced the song, they said their dua, they said their ibadah. In all of that, the common factor was the recognition of the Imam. And that has been expressed by Maula Bapa in many different farman. That has always been there. Right? When you look at, right from the time of Hazrat Ali, for example, you will find this notion of the recognition of the Imam has been a common, powerful indicator about the faith of our forefathers. And there have been many people who have tried to explain the notion of this recognition. And some with a lot more details than others. And most importantly, in this context, I'm speaking about recognition of the Imam. Whose job was it to tell our forefathers the true and absolute, non-negotiable knowledge of the haqiqat and marifat about our Imam? Remember the hadith I quoted in my Imamat Day presentation to say that I was a hidden treasure. I wanted to be known, so I created mankind so they could gain knowledge of me. So who gave this knowledge about the Nur wanting to be manifest? In this context, during the time of Mawla Murtaza Ali alayhi salam, I'm just taking that point as a beginning point, Holy Prophet Muhammad gave the recognition of Hazrat Ali. And what did he say about Hazrat Ali? Then, during the time of Imam Hussein, Hazrat HASSAM, his elder brother, who became the second peer, because Prophet Muhammad was the first peer, he gave the recognition of the Imam at that time. In other words, explain to the murid who the Imam is. Don't lose your train of thought. I'm specifically asking this question: who was authorized to give this information and this knowledge about the recognition of the Imam? Based on all the farmans we have, and remember, the farman is the Imam, right? So only Imam can decide whom he wants to select to give this recognition. Why? because whom he selects will have the authority and will have the correct knowledge to tell the believers who the Imam is, without deconstructing things that don't exist, that are not part of that understanding, that people have either invented or fabricated or correlated, who knows. But the fact is this: who was in authority? During the time of Hazrat Ali himself gave his recognition. And you know, many times I quote part of that lecture that Hazrat Ali gave, known as Khutbatul Bayan, Khutbatul Iftikhar, and there are others. And the Holy Prophet, throughout his prophethood, he gave recognition of Hazrat Ali, where in the world of Islam, many of this was hidden or basically buried. But we never buried it. We've kept it alive and it's there. Anyway, cut a long story short. The authority that was given, that power and that knowledge of who the Imam is, were the holy peers. And then under the peer of the time, there were all these arrays of da'is and mu'allims and teachers and others. But it goes like this. There was the Imam of the time, then came the peers appointed by the Imam. The peer has to be appointed by the Imam. And the peer is the one, according to the Imam, he is the highest in creation. Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a peer. Our first peer. Now, you know, where is that understanding? Where is that knowledge in what people are saying outright out there about the Imam? So it is the peer who has the authority. And under the peer, those who have been trained by the peer to convey that message which the peer has given is conveyed by those that we call da'is in their various classifications and others, to tell the Jamaat who the Imam is and teach the Jamaat the recognition of the Imam. This was not an independent function that anybody can take the liberty and the freedom to go and redefine what the Imam is. So people say, oh, I'm going to give you my definition of who the Imam is. You know, the Imam is like a pear, the Imam is like an apple, the Imam is like a mango, the Imam is this and the Imam is that. But what about the meaning the peer is giving? He who was authorized by the Imam to give that meaning. Can you repeat the question, please? I want to make sure I say.
The question was only the faith of your forefathers.
Yes, thank you. I want to make sure that I'm not deviating. So now, who told our faith for our forefathers about the recognition of the Imam? The peer. They were authorized. It was that brand and that stamp approved knowledge by the Imam to tell the Jamaat who the Imam is and the recognition of the Imam. Because that is fundamental in the practice of the faith today, yesterday, tomorrow, and the faith of our forefathers. And our peers, throughout our history, without deviating from this truth, this hakikat, this marifat, they have always said, Ali Sahi Allah. It has been in our dua all over time. All the time. It is even in our dua today.
So can I just interject here? So the second part of the question was, if somebody who doesn't really have faith right now, can he be able to gain salvation on the shoulders of his forefathers? That's the second part of the question.
Yes. So, you know, there is this element of grace that Imam is given. And this one element of grace is this, that, you may remember I quoted one farman about Nusayri that Imam Sultan Rahmatullah gave. And he said that Nusayri, who was one of the believers, one of the faithful during the time of Hazrat Ali, I'm just paraphrasing the farman, he used to say, Ali Allah, meaning Ali is Allah himself. Ali is Allah himself. Ali Allah. And then he describes many details. But the crux is, the Imam says, those who have faith like Nusayri, Imam says, they will not be questioned in the day of judgment. And even their progeny will be given that blessing and that freedom. So now, to answer that question, it's a bit ambiguous. I said, the one who has posed the question to say, will I also, if my forefathers believe that, then can I basically piggyback on their back and gain that salvation? Well, if your forefathers had that recognition that Imam and Allah are one, and exactly this is what it is, one. Yesterday when I was speaking, I said 1 equal 1, which is true, but let's say, take the equal sign out, just say 1. 1. It is one. There is no other way to look at it. It is that unity, that Tawheed is one. And the believer, Wahid, in that oneness. Okay? Those who believe, if you have an ancestor who basically had that belief, and Imam blessed him with that grace and mercy, yes, there is a possibility. Because that ancestor may have left enough credit around for you to piggyback on him. I mean, that's what I would say.
Ameen.
So you can be rest assured when the Imam says that the progeny of Nusayri will not be subjected to, those examinations and question on the day of judgment because of that faith, the faith they had about Islam. And I said today too the same thing. I mean, as I said, one of the elements about the recognition, one of the elements about the faith of our forefathers, and I say to anyone, it was the recognition of the Imam. How did they recognize the Imam? And I was trying to tell you, the knowledge of that recognition came from the holy peers who themselves are the manifestation of Nur and Muhammadi. They are Nur, and from the Nur they are telling us, Hazrat Imam himself is Allah Almighty, meaning he is Allah's Nur. So why are we dividing the Imam from that oneness? Why are you separating him? I keep asking that. And people are saying all kinds of things, all kinds of labels. Where is the logic in that? Where is the logic? And basically to derail people into their thinking to say, oh, well, now we are talking about all kinds of different entities and then try to redefine what the peer says to us into those various modalities of explanation. It's totally illogical. So the point is, follow the peer, follow your forefathers, because the knowledge of Ismaili Tariqah comes from the Imam, and the Imam himself is the peer today. So understand the position of the peer. And when the Imam said the peer teaches you the recognition of the Imam, then look at the Ginans. That's why the Ginans are there, to teach us the recognition of the Imam and to teach us our spirituality. Why are we going into this path of demeaning, diluting, and degrading the supreme position of the Imam, who is the Nur himself, who has made that statement in so many different places and ways, and we are basically pumping that kind of definition that frankly doesn't make sense. So we have to be logical in our endeavor. And if there is anything that is contradictory to what the peer says, then that is not our knowledge about the Imam. The knowledge of the Imam comes from the holy peers, because that is what the Imam has desired about him, and by the Imam themselves. So I say, gather that information. You want to be logical? Well, gather that information. Here's the information about what the peer is saying about the Imam. Here is the information about the Imam that Imam is saying about the Imam. There is no contradiction. No contradiction. And therefore, I stand by my articulation that our peers have always said to us from the beginning of time, even from the time of creation, that the Imam himself is Nur. Allah's Nur is his Nur. He is the Nur. He is the source of all. Being the Nur, he is Allah himself. Don't separate it. Do not destroy his oneness. Do not destroy his mono-reality. It is one absolute reality. Other than that, you are free to go and eat anywhere and see whether you can fill your stomach with that kind of information and knowledge. But the knowledge of the peer and the knowledge of the Imam is not ambiguous. It is direct, it is straight, it is unambiguous. And when the holy peer says to us, Ali to sahi Allah kahiye, temahe ochu nahi relegard, then it tells you in black and white, in plain language, that Ali is truly Allah and do not have any doubt about it. And if you have any element of doubt, then that is your doubt, then you deal with it. But do not say the faith does not clearly, openly, emphatically, unambiguously, and more directly expresses this hakikat, this marifat of the faith about the identity and who our beloved Imam is. There is no ambiguity in the faith. You can create the ambiguity by bringing any kind of models, but that is not the ambiguity in the faith. The faith is clear. It clearly says what it is. Now it's up to the individual to decide how they want to understand it, how they want to search it, how they want to define it or redefine it, but that is at your individual level. That's up to you. That is not at the level of the faith. No one, Hazrat Imam has not authorized anyone to redefine who he is and to redefine what the holy peers have told us. You might say, how do you know? Are you not reciting Ginans in Khane? Are you not reciting Farmans in Khane? Are you not reciting Qasidas in Khane that expresses this hakikat? There you are. So look into the Ginans, look into the Qasida, look into the holy Farmans and teachings, the Talim of the Imam, the Tawil of the Imam. This hakikat, Ali Sayyallah, is our foundation. This is what makes us different than all others. Now, we can philosophize, we can do all we want with it. It doesn't change that reality. You can wear green glasses and red glasses and pink glasses and look at the sun. It doesn't change the sun. It may change the color in your perception, but that doesn't change the sun. The Imam is that sun. Now you decide which glasses you want to wear and whose glasses you want to wear. And I said to you, wear the glasses the peer has given you, because that is where our salvation is. And I have untim and multiple farmans to prove that. And I will do that into one of my lectures that is shortly forthcoming. So I'm being very emphatic because I receive many questions about people who suddenly have this notion that they can redefine the Imam or give their own definition. Look, that is not my concern. Your definition, your meaning, whether you wear black glasses or blue glasses, whether you are blind to, is your definition. And it is you who basically are saying that, you know. And our peers have explained this confusion in some Ginans where he says, you know what? I am concerned at fikat chemuni vartamari. Manas rupeshai shanijanumji. You know, in this verse of the Gita, the Holy Spirit says, I have some concern, I have some anxiety, I have some worry. You are going to confuse him to be an ordinary human being. And when you reach that confusion, you are going to mislabel him. So,
thank you. That was that's a great way to end the session. We've had a wonderful, wonderful evening. I've had a whole breadth of different types of questions. Thank you for addressing them. Thank you for spending your time with us. May Allah fulfill all your wishes.
Amen.
Give you barakat in everything you do.
Amen.
And good health, prosperity. May He continue ibadat.
Amen.
His sahibi batu.
Amen.